Okay, so for the final part of the height field section of this workshop, we will create the masks that we need for texturing when we start to build our shaders. The first one that I will create is just a generic noise that we'll use to break up some of the texture colors in the grass. So we'll drop down a VOP, another attribute VOP, and plug that in. Jump inside and drop down a noise, an anti-aliased noise. Okay, plug that in and we'll put down a fit range. Again, it's far too big, so we will change the frequency. To something like this is fine, and clamp the values. And the reason we want this is to add some variation to the grass. We could even use it to add variation to the scatter if we choose to do so a bit later. The next thing I want to create is the mask for the riverbank. So because the river will sit on a flat plane, we can again just use the vector to float. And extract the Y. Take the Y value, plug that in. This time I'll set the min value to something like -0.2 and the max value to -1. And we now get that little mask here that we can use as a dirt mask. Okay. Next I'll bring in the sediment using an import point attribute, because the sediment attribute that we created is a point attribute. So let's just bring this in from the first input, set it to float, and type in sediment. Now let's plug this in just to see what it looks like at the moment. I'll put down a fit range just to clamp these values. And tighten them up. So we can use these as they are, as river masks. Another thing we can do, if these are a little too sharp at the moment, you can see they are also a little bit noisy, is we can drop down an attribute blur. So type in blur, attribute blur, and type in sediment. And we can step this down so we get a smoother transition and pump this up. Now this mask is really useful for when we want to generate textures that are near any of the rivers, so we could have some sort of fall off from the rivers. Jump back inside. And the last one that I want to create is some sort of snow mask for the top of these mountains. So we will start with a noise, drop down a noise. Again, set it to something low. In case you don't already know, I am middle clicking on the 3D frequency, and that's how you access this step menu. Plug this in. I could have just copy and pasted this. And crank this up. Oh. So this is one way to do this. We could, for instance, create the noise, drop down another one of these vector to float nodes, drop down a multiply node, and use it to mask off the noise on any areas below the mountain peaks. Source max would be something like 100 and min perhaps 90. Now the problem with this is you still get a really strong line that runs across the mountain. So instead of doing it this way, we'll do it somewhat similar to what we did with the Voronoi noise. And this time we'll, instead of creating the noise and masking it off, we will instead drive the P position of the height mask by the noise itself. So I'll drop down and add, and plug this in, disconnect these two guys, and plug this in. And plug the noise into the add. It is too low on the amplitude, so we'll crank this up. And this way we get a much nicer blend between the snow and the grass below, or the rock below. I'll crank up this roughness too. Now it does just about work for this distance, although you can see the quality starts to drop a little here, and if we got any closer than this, I would probably find a better way of doing this. So that is all the masks that I want here. The next step would be just to drop down the bind exports to make sure that we can use these in the texturing stage. So bind export. This one can be grass mask. We have a dirt mask below. Our new sediment mask. And finally, the snow mask. Okay, so we will again take these masks forward with us when we move into shading. But that's all I wanted to cover for this section of height fields. Next up, we'll be looking at speed tree and creating the geometry we need for our scatters. So, thank you.